It's time now for County-Wide, a special presentation of Yavapai Broadcasting News. Join Paul David and Brad Miller as they talk with our community's leaders, newsmakers, and people in the know. You'll hear about the hot topics that affect all our lives here in Yavapai County. And now, here's today's County-Wide.
Bill Cowan is back with us, local historian. Welcome back, Bill.
Thank you, Paul.
Last time you were here, we were talking about the big bank robbery out in Clarkdale. We had the reenactment.
I want to thank you. It was a rousing success, I'll tell you. That it was so exciting that I just couldn't even believe how many people came up. And
Good.
Yavapai Broadcasting is responsible for much of that.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that. We want to talk about your book this time. Last time you were here to pretty much talk specifically about the bank robbery, and that's what we did, and then the home show in Clarkdale. But we do want to, I wanted to re-hit the book called Verde Valley that you wrote. And I think we want to go back from the beginning. And to be honest with you, I just want to kind of turn it over to you and have you just kind of talk about how things got started here in the Verde Valley.
Well, the valley had, of course, been here for, the last depositional environment was the Verde limestone, which was 5 million years ago. There were these volcanic eruptions down in the lower end of the Verde that kept damming it up, and so that the Verde was like a lake for a long time. But 15,000 years ago, there were Clovis people, hunter-gatherers that lived here in the Verde. Later Paleo-Indians, you find hearths. They didn't have houses. They were following the bounty of the land, much the same way that the Yavapai and Apache people did later. Mm-hmm. About 700 then came. We went through a period of drought, and it forced people down in along the Verde River. And places like Montezuma Well, Montezuma Castle, Tuzagoot, Clear Creek were developed at that particular time. And then there was the abandonment. It's interesting to talk to the Yavapai and Apache people, though, because they believe that here were the Anasazis, the Sinawa people, who had built pueblos and all of this material stuff, and they maintain that they were also here pretty much all along, and that though they simply camped and didn't leave the impact that could be followed. And Vince Randall has a real convincing theory about the fact that the Yavapai and Apache people have been here much longer than many of the archaeologists believe. But in any case, the Mexicans were here, the Spaniards, and after 1821, Mexicans claimed all of the Southwest. Interestingly, during the Civil War, in fact, in 1851, well, I guess probably ought to point out the end of the Mexican War. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the Mexican War, all of what is California, Arizona, New Mexico west of the Rio Grande, southwestern part of Colorado, all of Utah, Nevada, all became part of the Southwest. Manifest destiny. God gave us the right to own from ocean to ocean. Right. And the 49ers came streaming across northern Arizona, and ultimately a lot of people got over there and they were homesick. And so as they came back, they didn't know what they were looking for on the way over there, but they knew what they were looking for on the way back, and they found it along the Gila River.
What were they looking for?
They were looking for gold.
Okay.
And so that's what the 49er gold rush was about. Mm-hmm. So it's said that Arizona is the only state that is settled from the west to the east. Everybody else is from east to west. But
maybe they were just traveling slower back.
Yeah, they were coming back. Yes, absolutely. And during the Civil War, the people in Yuma, Tucson, Ajo, notice all of these have either Native American or Spanish names, they'd all been advocating for a separation of a new territory from New Mexico territory. With the end of the Mexican War, all of Arizona and New Mexico were essentially one territory, and so they began advocating. It said they had no laws, no judges, and no women, and that it was no place to be, and they wanted to create their own territory. And so, but because of the slave issues, it could never happen until the Civil War. And during the Civil War, one of the very first things that the Confederacy did is recognize the territory of Arizona, which included Tucson, Yuma, and originally it was proposed that Arizona be separated east and west, sort of like Kentucky and Tennessee on the with an east and west line rather than a north and south line.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, the Stars and Bars ran over, flew over the town of Tucson, down in the old Presidio, and the United States legislature finally got off, and in 1862 passed the Organic Act creating the territory of Arizona. But rather than recognize it separating from New Mexico territory, east and west, as had been considered and planned, it was north and south. And they made 3 corners and a side into 4 corners. And they extended the division point between Utah and Colorado on south, and sent the gubernatorial party into the west. And because Tucson was considered to be a hotbed of Southern sympathizers, it was decided that they were going to establish a territorial capital someplace up here in the north. And in early 1863, there had been a gold discovery in the Bradshaw Mountains, and so along Granite Creek there was a population, there was a gold rush over into the Bradshaws, and so it was decided to send these bureaucrats out here into the untrammeled West and to send them to this developing fort at Del Rio. And very shortly thereafter, they arrived in January 26, 1864, and by early February, they had actually come down here into the Verde.
You know what? Let's take a break right there, and when we come back, we'll have you talk about that first jaunt down here into the Verde Valley. That would be great. Bill Cowan in studio today, local historian with the book Verde Valley. I'm Paul David. This is Countywide. We'll be back in just a couple minutes. Thank you. Great job. You're taking us through the tour quick.
I'm one unlucky guy. The chance of being involved in a robbery is 1 in 757. The chances of being struck by lightning. 1 in 750,000.
Please fasten your seatbelts for unexpected turbulence.
The chances of being a victim in an airline crash? 1 in 29 million. Hey, could I get some peanuts? The chances of being involved in a car crash are far greater than lightning strikes and plane crashes. And if you are texting while driving, your risk of crash increases 23 times. Now, I may be an unlucky guy, but I don't have to be part of that statistic, and neither do you. Drive responsibly.
Remember when you were younger and your parents said,
"Don't make a mess"?
And remember comments like,
"Pipe down."
Now it's time to find your own voice.
Don't bounce the ball in the house.
Strike out on your own. Remember the rules, but don't be afraid to take chances. Explore your sense of wonder. Feed your curiosity. Yavapai College. Life explored.
There's no place like home.
Getting home safely is just a click away. But making sure your child is in the right seat is just one of the steps down the road to safer travels.
I don't know how it works.
Find the right seat for your little one's age and size.
We've done what you told us.
There's no better way to get home safely. Know for sure that your child is in the right seat. Get all the facts at safercar.gov/the right seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
David here. Good to have you in the studio. Bill Cowan is with us, a local historian. We're talking about his book, Verde Valley. And we've made it to the Verde Valley. We've been kind of traveling around. You've been telling us about the territory. So kind of who was some of the first people to be in the Verde Valley?
Well, actually, interestingly, the first non-Indian to come into the Verde Valley was a fellow by the name of Antonio Espejo, who was in the Verde Valley and, in fact, came down past Dolman Lake and ultimately up to Jerome. He came past Montezuma Well in 1583, less than 100 years after Columbus, and well before Jamestown or any permanent colonies, settlements in what would come to be America. Later, the first white American people to come into the Verde was a trapping expedition led by James Ohio Patty in 1826, and a division of that group led by Ewing Young and a young kid by the name of Kit Carson actually came into the Verde. I believe they were trapping beavers. They were trapping otter and stuff like that. And I believe that Beaver Creek may well be the oldest place name. And then interestingly, once the territory of Arizona was established, Jose Francisco Chavez, along with the newly appointed Arizona Territorial Party, they came down into the Verde, and they knew what was here. I mean, they realized Prescott is at almost a mile high. Here's the Verde, and they came down here in February, and the grass was starting to green up, and so that they liked the Verde. It was very shortly thereafter. Additionally, in going along with the Civil War, historically the mail had gone down towards Tucson and out that way on the Butterfield stage, or that way, and they were trying to establish connection routes, and in fact a mail route that came down across the Verde and went on to New Mexico. And so, interestingly, the California Volunteers came in and established Fort Whipple, later Fort Verde, and they wanted to, they were subduing the Indians. Interestingly, in 1871, they set aside the Rio Verde Reservation. They gave the land from the confluence of the Verde River, which is where Fort Verde was, from the confluence of the Verde River and Beaver Creek, upstream 40 miles and 10 miles on either side. They gave it to the Indians. They set it aside as a reservation. And so there was substantial settlement in and around Fort Verde and below that on Clear Creek. The first settlement of the Verde, the first civilians to come into the Verde, came in January of 1865. They came down here and reconnoitered. They ultimately established a colony, the first settlement at the confluence of Clear Creek and the Verde River. It's flat down there. They realized historically that they couldn't irrigate out of the Verde. It was always tough to try to dam up the main river, so that they would pick up a small tributary and try to take irrigation out of that. It was a smaller dam, easier to, and also at the mouths of these tributaries like Beaver Creek or Oak Creek or Sycamore, even for that matter, there are these wide alluvial fans, and it accommodated settlement. So the first settlement was down there at Clear Creek.
I'll be darned.
And then Fort Verde was established to provide protection for those people.
I noticed your book talks a lot about Montezuma Castle and Montezuma Well. At the beginning, a lot. It was like a tourist attraction. People came from a long ways away.
Well, people did come from a long ways away. Espejo had been there. They were prominent, memorable. What was it that, if you were here in the wilderness, the spectacular archaeological ruins that were over at Montezuma Well. Montezuma Well being a warm spring, steam rises off of it in the wintertime. What a memorable location. And of course, Montezuma Well, or Montezuma Castle, is just about, same like Tusagut, spectacular Indian ruins indicating the presence of a huge population. I've seen numbers as high as 10,000, 12,000 people alive at once in the Verde before abandonment in the 1400s. But and the name Montezuma, though, comes from this man whose name was William Hinckley Prescott. He was an anthropologist in the 1840s and 1850s. He had written a treatise on the life and times of Hernan Cortez. And Cortez came ashore in what is Mexico and fought with Montezuma. And so when they named Prescott, they named the town, the new territorial capital of the territory of Arizona, Prescott, in honor of William Hinckley Prescott. And if you go, Whiskey Row is Montezuma and the other one is Cortez.
Right.
The main street is Gurley, which was the first territorial governor in the back when anyway, all the four streets there are named because of the history that Prescott had written.
Now, Fort Verde, that was key to this area.
Fort Verde was key. The Army was essentially the cash cow that funded development. Interestingly, I put together numbers of when Crook was here, and he had an operating budget of around $1 million a year.
Oh wow, that's a lot of money.
I mean, $1,873 to subdue the Indians.
Tons of money.
And so here were these men buying grain and fish and firewood and anything that you could bring down to the fort and convince the hay. That was what essentially funded the development. I mean, all of the early homesteaders talk about going down to Fort Verde and selling. And originally the settlement here, when they were settling at Clear Creek, they actually had to haul their hay clear to Prescott. As a matter of fact, Ed Peck had a hay contract of almost $300,000.
Wow.
In 1865. He was one of the earliest people. Peck's Lake is named for him because he was here haying, collecting hay early on.
Wow. Wow. We'll have to take a short break. Bill Cowan is in studio today, local historian. He wrote the book Verde Valley. I'm Paul David. This is Countywide, and we'll be back in just a couple minutes.
Remember all those rules you heard as a child?
Do not play with fire.
You'll always remember those rules.
Don't sit so close to the screen.
But now there are times you may have to challenge those rules.
Stay inside the lines.
And bending those rules may even lead to a career.
Pick up your toys, kids.
Imagine all the possibilities. When you venture out to make your life your own, remember the rules, but don't be afraid to take chances. Explore your sense of wonder. Feed your curiosity. Yavapai College. Life explored.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
Daddy, I'm gonna find you.
They say that when you're facing extreme danger, your life flashes before you. If you think that's sad, consider facing it before you even have enough life to flash before your eyes. Car crashes are a leading killer of children 1 to 13. Deaths and injuries can be prevented by using the right car seat. Visit safercar.gov/the-right-seat to know what is appropriate for each age and size.
Welcome back to Countywide. We have just a few minutes left in the program. Bill Cowan, author of Verde Valley, is in studio today. We wanted to continue. You said you wanted to make sure we get 1 point in for sure before we call it a close today.
The one point that I wanted to make was that in 1871, Rio Verde Reservation was set up, giving the Indians basically forever, as long as the sky was blue and the river ran, the land above Camp Verde. In 1875, the Indians were becoming hugely independent, and so it was decided to consolidate all the Native American tribes in the state of Arizona, including Geronimo and the people from the Chiricahuas at San Carlos, and so they were taken out. And what that did, though, is that provided an untrammeled and pretty well settled corridor. And the Indians left in February, and in middle of August, towards the end of August, here came the first wagon train of settlers settling at Middle Verde. And there were also a group of individuals that came into what had been the headquarters of the Rio Verde Reservation, and there was a tall stand of cottonwoods there. And they settled along the original irrigation ditch, and the place became known as the Cottonwoods. In 1876, here was Morris Andrew Ruffner camping out at Peck's Lake, climbing every day up the hill, searching around for what would come to be Jerome. And the rest, they say, is history. It was so... you know, if you go into Camp Verde, it says the valley's oldest settlement. Well, Camp Verde was established in 1875. Whenever you go into the balance of the communities, you also see that cluster right there, Jerome 1876, Cottonwood 1876, etc. They're all, or 1879 was when the Willards got here. But you see that that cluster of dates that is in many ways occurred because of the removal of the Yavapai and Apache people.
Very key time right here then.
You bet.
Yeah, so we just kind of spread out and settled in different little areas, didn't we? We ran out of time. I guess we're going to have you back and talk some more. I love listening to you talk about it. It's really very, very interesting to find out where we came from, how this whole area came about. So, Bill Cowan, I thank you so much. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you.
All right,
it's a privilege.
Yeah, Verde Valley is the name of the book. I'm Paul David. That's today's Countywide. We will talk to you again next time.
It's something that is interesting. The book is basically